Now is the time when we're going to take what we've learned in the earlier exercises and earlier lessons and put it all together. We're going to build out a nice application using the JSON server. So let's clean up our code a little bit, and I've also saved the source code there. We'll work off the index file. So let's close that up and open up our editor so we can see it as full size. So we need to have a few different areas here. And we see that we've already set up these buttons. We can keep the buttons or we can get rid of them. Actually, it doesn't matter because this is not going to be part of our form. We're also going to take in, set up some more divs here. I could also use classes as well. So it all depends on what we want to do. So we'll call this one page info. So this can sit right up at the top, and this can present information about the page so that we know which page we're on. And the idea here is that the user is going to be able to come in, they're going to see the page information, and just like what we see within this JSON database, that we can post comments on the post ID. So for post ID 1, this comment will show up, and we can add additional comments, and then we can move to another post, add comments for that, and so on. So add some fun and flexibility to our application. So let's add in some buttons here. So we've got our page info, and this will move us from so it'll move us to the previous entry to the next entry. And also we need an area to output content. And there's also a really nice feature here that you can do a search really easily. So we'll add that in as well. So this one is ID, and just give it an ID of output. So this is where we're going to dump our page information and our output and whatever we want. So this is going to be a really useful part of this application. Also a form, and we'll give it an ID. So my form, something silly like that, like my form, and input type equals text. And we're just going to give them all names. So this one is going to be first name. So keeping in sync with what we have within our database, I'm going to assign some default values. So this one is going to be JSON, and we can just copy this one out, so we don't have to keep typing. So we'll have another input. So we'll have the three inputs. So first name, last name, company, and then we'll also do an input, and this time is going to be a submit button. So the idea is that whenever you click it, we're going to submit the form. And we'll give it a value, send data. So whatever that data is, we're sending it over at this point. Let's update these. So this one can be last name. And maybe what we can do to be a little bit more efficient, we'll just give them all of those same. So we're going to match with what we have available within our database. So we don't have to retype a lot of that stuff. Tester, and we'll just Acme. That's the company that they work for. So also let's set up the rest of our HTML. So we'll have another input here. So this is not part of the form. So this would be a separate input with a separate text field here. Give it a name of search. So this is going to be our search field, and this time let's do a button class. We can give it a class of button as well, and ID. And I know I'm using IDs quite a bit here, and this is also optional, but just making it a lot easier for the demonstration purposes to make these selections and to identify all the different elements. We're also going to set up an area for comments. So this will be where we have our spot. So we'll just have a text area, and this is going to be where the user can add comments to the different posts that we have. So ID comments, and close off that text area. And then also lastly, we just need a way to submit those comments. So we can do a button class and button. And let's give this one an ID. So this is the last one. So add comment will be our ID. Add comment. And then maybe all we need to do still, we should have a line break. So there we go. So we've got our output, we've got comments, and maybe even the comments should sit below. It's not going to be styled, so it's not going to be really the nicest looking interface, but it should work and it should serve the purpose for this exercise. So let's see what this looks like. So we'll hide that side menu, shrink this down, refresh. So there we go. So we've got essentially an interface here. So we've got our input area here for the text, and we can add in data, we can go previous, next, and maybe we want to hide these buttons. So just do hide. So not going to be using them, but I'll keep them within the code so that we can reference them if we need to. And class hide is just going to be display none. And we'll make the padding smaller because these buttons have really massive padding. So don't necessarily need that. And also maybe we want the form to stand out. So form and background. So do a background color. And I know I said I don't want to do too crazy with CSS. So I just want to have it stand out a little bit. And we'll do solid and do black on this one as well. And add in some padding. So see what that looks like. So that we can actually see which one our form is. Next, previous. And also, so I think that's pretty good. So we'll just leave it at that. Get rid of this. Bring it closer and together. So now we can add some functionality. So one of the things too that I wanted to update here, so typically we've kind of incorporated this whole XML HTTP request, but for some of the stuff we don't actually need it. We don't need to have the request headers if we're just getting data. So we don't need all of these parameters either. So this is stuff that's added in that's not necessarily useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to break it up into two separate types of requests. So we'll have our typical get, and then we'll have our post. So make get, and we know that this one is going to be get, so I can update the request type to get. We still need the URL, and that's about all we need for this one. And maybe we'll do something different with this information as well. And we'll get rid of that request header. We can also get rid of data, so because we're not going to need it. We can also get rid of the request. So this one is going to be make post. So we do need a URL and we do need data, and we can get rid of this one here. So clean it up a little bit. And so now let's we've gotten rid of these event listeners. So now let's do something different for these event listeners, because we've got to hook up a whole bunch of different event listeners right now as well. And we can reuse some of the ones that we already have. So let's make some space, and we've got a bunch of event listeners that we've got to hook up. So we've got our previous and next. And to save some space, I'm going to do all of the event listeners on one. So just do it all in one here, and then we'll do the add event listener right to the object. And then this time we're listening for click, and when it's clicked, we fire off a function, and then this is our function in here. I'll do the same thing for this other one as well. So I'm just trying to do it as quick as possible to hook all of this stuff up. So we've got those two buttons, so those are functional now. We've got the form submit. So this one is going to be listening for the form submit. And so it's going to be doing query selector, and we've got my form. So add event listener, and the event listener that we're listening for is submit. And this one we need to pass an event here because we also want to do event prevent default. So I don't want that one firing off, so we'll do the prevent default, which will stop the form from actually moving to the next page. another couple event listeners that we still need to add in here. So the other event listeners that we have to listen for, so whenever search gets clicked, then we want to submit a search. And this is going to search through all the data in the database. And then also we want to add a comment. So there we go. So we've got everything hooked up and ready to go. So those are essentially our 5 event listeners. I'm also going to keep this message one because this one is useful for outputting. And I'm going to also copy that out, and I'm going to do one for output as well because we created an element called output. So we want to dump some information in there. So just do output. And then these event listeners, we can leave here for now as they're not really getting in the way, or we could just comment them out as we're not going to be making use of them. So we already hid the elements there, display none. But we'll keep them in there, and maybe what we can do is just grab them and we'll move them right to the bottom. So they're not going to really be in the way, or we'll comment them out. So they're still there if we need to reference them, but we're not making use of them. So right now, let's do a quick code cleanup there to make it look a little nicer. So we've got our 2 main functions that are going to fire off the events. So first of all, when we come into our web page, we need a starting point. So we're going to set a variable, so global variable, and we'll just call it current ID. So the current ID is 1. So we're looking at the first item with ID 1. So that corresponds with the database of posts. And the way that we're going to be doing this is we're going to grab the posts. So starting at first one, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and we're going to output the information contained within the posts, and we'll output that on the page itself. So that's the first thing that we want to do, and we want the user to be able to click next to move to the next one, and then to the previous one, clicking previous. So over here where we've got our functions, so we've got, and these ones actually should be next and previous. So I just copied them, but I didn't update them. So what we want to do for next, we want to increment the value of this. And we want to output that information that's contained. So we want to send out a GET request. We want to return that data back, and we want to update the page with that data. And for previous, we actually want to do the exact same thing, but we want to subtract from the ID. And so the next function is going to be the same thing because we want to query into that URL, and we want to just simply output that data into our output area. So create a brand new function, and we're just going to call it load page. So it'll load page, and it'll just take, and we don't need to pass any parameters because we can pick up that current ID. This is a global value, so we can always pick that up and make use of it. So let's do function, and we'll call it load page. And the page that we want to load is going to be whatever corresponds with the current ID. So we'll just console log out, and so this one is going to have to build a page. So let's shrink that out, and let's try this out. So hopefully everything is working, and we see that within the console. So we're getting build page when we're clicking previous and next. So perfect, exactly what we want. And maybe we want to move that output area from the very bottom. So next, we need to output content. So that means that we have to load the data from our database. So that's coming up next.